Commander Ashley Morrison stood at parade rest before the Galactic Defense Coalition's Assignment Council, her ceremonial dress blues pristine despite the sweltering heat of the chamber. The alien counselors preferred their environment at 40 degrees Celsius, another subtle reminder that humans were guests here, barely tolerated ones at that. The Council has reached its decision regarding Earth's fleet position, announced High Commander Vex Thor, his crystalline form refracting the harsh light. After careful consideration of your species' limited experience in void combat. Morrison's jaw clenched. Limited experience. As if the Battle of New Mars hadn't proved humanity's worth 10 times over. As if she hadn't personally led the counter-offensive that saved 3 coalition worlds from pirates using nothing but retrofitted mining vessels. Earth will be assigned command of the 7th Auxiliary Patrol Fleet. The words hit like a physical blow. 7th Auxiliary, the bottom of the barrel. Morrison's eyes flicked to the holographic display showing her new command. 12 ships so outdated that even scrappers had passed them over. The Magellan-class cruisers were older than she was, their neural interfaces practically Stone Age compared to modern vessels. The Council believes this assignment best suits your species' current capabilities, Vex Thor continued, his crystalline fragments vibrating with what Morrison recognized as barely concealed amusement. The patrol route has been selected to minimize potential incidents. Translation: they were being sent to the middle of nowhere, where humanity couldn't embarrass the Coalition's more advanced species. Morrison's hand brushed against her pocket, feeling the familiar shape of her old gaming medallion. Grand Champion, International Fleet Combat Simulator League, 2045 to 2047. The same skills that had made her a legend in competitive gaming had helped her save actual lives at New Mars, but the Council dismissed all that as primitive intuition. Commander Morrison. The High Commander's tone shifted to one of condescending concern. You appear disturbed by this most generous assignment. Morrison straightened, letting a slow smile spread across her face. Not at all, High Commander. In fact, I'd like to thank the Council for this opportunity. A ripple of confusion passed through the assembled aliens. This wasn't the reaction they'd expected. You see, Morrison continued, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. These ships remind me of something from Earth's history. During our Second World War, there was a squadron called the Flying Tigers. They flew outdated planes against supposedly superior forces. She paused, letting her smile sharpen. They achieved the highest kill ratio of any air unit in the war. Your historical analogies are irrelevant, dismissed Council Member Zix, her tentacles writhing in irritation. Modern void combat is based on precise calculations and advanced neural networks, not games and primitive instincts. Morrison nodded, the picture of respectful agreement. Of course, Council Member. Though I should mention, those neural networks, the ones that make modern ships so efficient, they're based on the same principles as our combat simulation games, the ones I spent 10 years mastering before joining the fleet. She could see she'd struck a nerve. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably, their species' various biological displays showing signs of agitation. They'd read her file. They knew exactly what she'd achieved in those primitive games. Your assignment is final, Commander. Vex Thor cut in sharply. Report to your fleet within 3 standard cycles. Dismissed. Morrison snapped a perfect salute and turned on her heel, striding from the chamber with her head high. Let them think they'd put humanity in their place. Let them think they'd sidelined Earth's best commander with a fleet of digital dinosaurs. They'd forgotten something crucial. Every gamer worth their salt knew that sometimes the best speedrunning strategies came from exploiting older versions. The bugs, the glitches, the primitive systems that modern patches had smoothed away. Those were exactly what made record-breaking runs possible. Mom. Her XO, Lieutenant Rodriguez, fell into step beside her as she exited the building. Orders. Morrison's smile hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown sharper, more predatory. Contact the engineering teams. Tell them to start stripping out every single safety upgrade the Coalition installed on our new ships. We're going back to basics. Back to basics, ma'am. The Council just gave us exactly what we needed, Lieutenant. Ships too old to hack, too simple to predict, and too worthless to monitor. She pulled out her gaming medallion, running her thumb over its worn surface. Time to show the galaxy why humans never stopped playing games. 3 months into their patrol route, Commander Morrison slouched in her captain's chair aboard the HMS Venture, watching her crew work with their newly stripped-down systems. The Coalition's generous patrol route had them circling the dead zone, a region of space so empty even pirates avoided it. Perfect for hiding away the embarrassing humans and their primitive ships. Contact. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice cut through the quiet bridge. Multiple signatures coming out of deep space, bearing 035. Morrison straightened, instantly alert. Classification. Unknown, ma'am. There, Rodriguez frowned at his jury-rigged sensor display. They're not broadcasting any recognition codes, but these energy patterns. I've never seen anything like this. Put it on the main display, Morrison ordered, her eyes narrowing as the sensor data filled the ancient holographic projector. The energy signatures pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, like a heartbeat but wrong somehow. Too coordinated, too perfect. Ma'am, Chief Engineer Patel's voice crackled over the comm. Remember those old sensor logs you had me studying? The ones from the Centauri Massacre? Morrison's blood ran cold. The Centauri Massacre, when an entire colony disappeared overnight, leaving behind only fragments of ships and scrambled distress signals. The Coalition had classified it as a natural disaster. Show me the comparison. The displays split, showing the current readings alongside the historical data. The patterns were identical. Battle stations, Morrison ordered, her voice deadly calm. All ships, maintain emission control. Rodriguez, get me a tight beam to Coalition Command. They're not responding, ma'am, Rodriguez reported after a tense minute. We're getting automated replies about non-emergency communications protocols. Morrison's gaming medallion felt heavy in her pocket. She'd seen this pattern before, not in real combat, but in thousands of simulator runs, when you couldn't contact command, when unknown signals appeared in dead space, when everything screamed trap. That's when you had to make the hard calls. All ships, this is Commander Morrison. Begin Operation Ghost Runner. Her crew moved with practiced precision, implementing the unorthodox protocols they'd drilled for months. Coalition observers had called them crazy, wasting time practicing obsolete tactics. Now those same tactics might save billions of lives. New contacts. Rodriguez's voice cracked. Massive energy spike at bearing 117. There, dear God. The holographic display filled with nightmare shapes. Biomechanical vessels that seemed to writhe and pulse. The swarm, the boogeyman of Coalition space, thought to be hibernating in the depths between galaxies. Instead, they were here, massing for an attack on the Coalition's core worlds. How many? Morrison demanded. At least 300 ships in the initial wave, more emerging every minute. Rodriguez swallowed hard. Ma'am, Coalition doctrine calls for a minimum of 20 capital ships to engage even one swarm vessel. We have 12 outdated cruisers. Morrison's hand closed around her medallion. Coalition doctrine also says these ships are worthless. Coalition doctrine says humans are primitive. Coalition doctrine, she smiled grimly, is about to get a serious update. Signal the fleet. Initiate attack pattern speed devil. Mom. Rodriguez turned, his eyes wide. That's the maneuver you theorized from the old game exploits. We've never tested it in real combat. Then we're about to make history. Morrison stood, addressing her bridge crew. The swarm thinks in perfect patterns. They predict responses based on optimal solutions. But humans, we've never cared about optimal. We care about winning. She watched her small fleet begin their seemingly random movements, each ship following patterns derived from decades-old gaming strategies. Patterns that looked like chaos to advanced tactical computers, but held a deeper logic, the logic of speedrunners and sequence breakers. They gave us ships too old to hack, Morrison declared, watching the swarm fleet draw closer. Let's show them why that's exactly what we needed. Lieutenant Rodriguez, target the lead vessel. Time to give the galaxy a lesson in human tactics. The void lit up with weapons fire, and humanity's last line of defense engaged the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The real game was about to begin. Engineering reports ready, weapons hot. All safety protocols disabled, Lieutenant Rodriguez announced, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. The rest of the fleet awaits your command. Commander Morrison studied the tactical display, watching the swarm vessels spread out in their mathematically perfect attack formation. Her 12 ships looked pathetically small in comparison, scattered in what appeared to be random positions. Send to all ships. Execute sequence break alpha. Morrison's fingers traced the worn edges of her gaming medallion. Time to show them why speedrunners break games. The HMS Venture's engines roared to life, pushing the ancient cruiser well beyond its supposed limits. Without the Coalition's safety systems, the ship's reactor core ran hot enough to trigger dozens of theoretical warning indicators, if they hadn't stripped those out too. Ma'am. Chief Engineer Patel's voice crackled over the comm. We've got the reactor exploitation running just like you planned. She'll hold together for exactly 73 seconds at these temperatures. That's 60 more than we need. Morrison turned to her tactical officer. Status on the swarm's response. They're confused, ma'am. Their formation is shifting to account for our movement, but their predictive algorithms keep recalculating. We're not following any known combat doctrine. Morrison grinned. Because we're not using combat doctrine. We're using speed-running strats. Lieutenant Rodriguez, signal the Pathfinder and the Challenger. Execute the quantum corner clip. 2 of her ships suddenly accelerated at impossible angles, their stripped-down engines pushing them through a maneuver that should have torn them apart. The swarm's perfect formation rippled as their combat computers tried to predict the impossible trajectory. They're splitting their formation. Rodriguez called out. Just like you said they would. They can't compute our next move, because we're exploiting physics glitches their systems don't account for. Morrison nodded grimly. When you can't beat a game straight up, you find the exploits. Signal all ships. Deploy the minefields. Her fleet had spent months seeding this sector with what looked like space debris, fragments of asteroids and old satellites. But each piece had been carefully calculated, positioned for this exact moment. As her ships executed their random patterns, they herded the swarm fleet right where she wanted them. Swarm vessels entering the debris field. Tactical reported. Their shields are. Ma'am, they're not even bothering to deflect the debris. Their computers have classified it as harmless. Perfect. Detonate pattern echo. The debris field erupted. Each fragment contained a miniature fusion charge, not powerful enough to breach swarm shields individually, but when detonated in precisely the right sequence. Multiple direct hits. Rodriguez's voice rose with excitement. Their shield harmonics are destabilizing. The debris pattern created a resonance cascade exactly as you predicted. Morrison allowed herself a small smile. When you run the same game enough times, you learn to use every piece of the environment, even the parts nobody else thinks matter. She keyed her fleet-wide comm. All ships. This is Commander Morrison. Phase 1 complete. Begin Operation Frame Perfect. Her crews knew exactly what that meant. They'd drilled these maneuvers thousands of times, perfecting timing that had to be accurate to the millisecond, just like pulling off a perfect speed-running trick. Ma'am, Rodriguez interrupted. Incoming transmission from Coalition Command. They're ordering us to withdraw immediately and await the arrival of proper combat forces. Morrison's hand tightened around her medallion. Send them our sensor data and combat logs. Then tell them that humanity's primitive fleet is currently the only thing standing between the swarm and the coalition's core worlds. She paused, then added, and informed them that we're about to demonstrate why being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage of all. The void ahead blazed with weapons fire as her small fleet engaged the massive swarm armada. To any observer, it would look like suicide. But Morrison knew better. In gaming, sometimes the hardest bosses fell to the strangest strategies. All ships, she commanded. Execute bug exploit Delta. Let's show the galaxy how humans fight when we stop playing by the rules. The swarm's lead dreadnought emerged from the debris field like a nightmare-given form, its biomechanical hull pulsing with otherworldly energy. At 6 kilometers long, it dwarfed Morrison's entire fleet. Its weapon ports glowed with enough power to vaporize a small moon. All ships, execute bug exploit Delta, Morrison ordered, her voice steady. Remember your training. Just like the simulations. The HMS Venture shuddered as its engines pushed beyond their supposed limits. Without safety protocols, the ancient cruiser moved like a ship half its size, dancing through space in ways that violated every principle of modern void combat. Swarm vessel is tracking us, Rodriguez reported, his hands flying over his jury-rigged controls. Their targeting algorithms are. They're struggling to get a lock. Our movement patterns don't match anything in their database. Morrison nodded grimly. Because no one's tried these maneuvers since the safety systems made them impossible. Chief Patel, how's our reactor holding up? Running at 140% capacity, ma'am. Patel's voice crackled through the comm. She's screaming, but holding together. Just like those old gaming consoles we used to overclock. The dreadnought's first salvo lit up space, a perfectly calculated pattern of energy beams that should have caught any ships trying to evade. Instead, Morrison's fleet scattered in seemingly random directions, each vessel executing maneuvers pulled straight from classic gaming exploits. Pathfinder, Challenger, execute the quantum corner clip, Morrison commanded. Venture, prepare for the shield bump sequence. Two of her ships suddenly accelerated at impossible angles, their stripped-down engines pushing them through a maneuver that resembled an old physics glitch from combat simulators. The swarm's targeting systems, designed to predict optimal evasion patterns, couldn't track the deliberate errors in their movement. They're adapting, Rodriguez called out. Secondary weapons coming online. Wait. He paused, staring at his display. Commander, they're reducing power to their shields. They're diverting energy to computational systems. Morrison's grin turned predatory. They're trying to solve us, trying to find the pattern. Execute Phase 2. She keyed her fleet-wide comm. All ships, Operation Speed Devil starts now. Show them what happens when you try to calculate chaos. Her fleet split apart, each ship performing maneuvers that looked like critical navigation errors. The swarm dreadnought's weapons tracked them perfectly, too perfectly. Its targeting systems, enhanced by additional power from its shields, locked onto where each human ship should have been based on standard physics. But Morrison's crews weren't playing by standard physics anymore. Impact in 3, 2, 1. Rodriguez counted down. The void erupted with light as every weapon on the swarm dreadnought fired simultaneously. For a split second, space itself seemed to burn. When the energy dissipated, the human fleet had vanished. No casualties, Rodriguez reported with fierce pride. Every ship executed their frame-perfect dodge, just like we practiced. Signal the fleet, Morrison ordered. Begin attack, run vector strike. Her ships reappeared from behind a cloud of superheated debris, approaching the dreadnought from angles its designers had deemed impossible to attack from. With its shields weakened and its weapons in cooldown, the massive vessel was suddenly vulnerable. All ships, fire on my mark, Morrison commanded, her hand closing around her medallion one final time. Show them why humans never stopped playing games. 12 outdated cruisers opened fire simultaneously. Their weapons, considered primitive by coalition standards, struck with perfect precision, exploiting weak points that only existed for fractions of a second. The dreadnought's weakened shields collapsed under the assault. Direct hits across all vectors. Rodriguez shouted. Their hull integrity is, Commander, their entire command structure is destabilizing. Morrison watched as the massive vessel began to break apart, its biomechanical systems unable to cope with damage that came from impossible angles. Send to Coalition Command. First blood confirmed. The swarm can bleed. Above her tactical display, a message flashed. Achievement UNLOCKED. First kill. Unacceptable. High Commander Vexthor's crystalline form pulsed with angry colors across the holographic transmission. You have violated 17 different combat protocols. Commander Morrison stood on her bridge, hands clasped behind her back, expression neutral as she faced down the Coalition leadership. The wreckage of the swarm dreadnought drifted behind her ship, a testament to what primitive tactics could achieve. With respect, High Commander, Morrison replied, those 17 violations just saved billions of lives. The swarm is preparing for a full-scale invasion, and my fleet is the only thing that's proven capable of stopping them. Your fleet, Council Member Zix interrupted, her tentacles writhing in agitation, is a collection of obsolete vessels being operated in complete defiance of safety standards and combat doctrine. Exactly. Morrison allowed herself a small smile. That's why we won. The transmission suddenly split, showing a new figure, Admiral Blackwood from Earth's Naval Command. Commander Morrison, our analysts have reviewed your combat footage. Those maneuvers you pulled off, they're from the championship tournament of 2046, aren't they? The quantum corner clip was, Sir, Morrison nodded. Modified for three-dimensional space, of course. The shield bump sequence came from the 2047 speedrunning community. Insanity. Another Coalition commander cut in, his scaled face contorted in disgust. You're basing military strategy on entertainment programs. We're basing it on decades of humans finding ways to break complex systems, Morrison corrected. Every exploit, every glitch, every speedrunning trick represents thousands of hours of people pushing boundaries that were supposed to be impossible to break. She gestured to her tactical display. The swarm's entire combat doctrine is based on predicting optimal responses. We're winning because we're deliberately choosing suboptimal approaches they can't predict. Your victory was a statistical anomaly, Vexthor declared. The Coalition's main battle fleet will arrive in 3 days. You are ordered to withdraw and, unable to comply, High Commander, Morrison cut in, her voice firm. We've detected multiple swarm fleets converging on this sector. If we withdraw now, they'll have a clear path to the Coalition's core worlds. In 3 days, there won't be anything left for your battle fleet to save. She keyed a command, sending her tactical data to all channels. But I have a counter-proposal. I've already received volunteers from 15 other patrol fleets. Crews willing to strip down their ships and learn our methods. Give me command of those volunteers, and we can stop the swarm here and now. You would have us abandon centuries of proven combat doctrine. Council Member Zix demanded. No, Morrison smiled. I would have you embrace humanity's greatest strength, our ability to break any system we encounter. The swarm thinks they're facing primitive savages. Let's prove them right in all the ways they fear most. Admiral Blackwood's hologram nodded slowly. The Earth delegation supports Commander Morrison's request. The Coalition gave humanity these worthless ships because they thought we couldn't handle anything better. Now we've proven that what they saw as primitive is actually revolutionary. The Council erupted in argument, but Morrison's attention was drawn to her tactical display. Lieutenant Rodriguez, what's that energy signature? Multiple swarm vessels, Mom, Rodriguez reported. Bigger than anything we've encountered yet. They're adapting their formations, breaking from standard patterns. Morrison's hand found her medallion. Looks like we got their attention. Send to all ships. Begin Operation Speedrun. If they want to learn how humans fight, Let's give them an advanced course. The void lit up as her small fleet engaged the approaching swarm armada. Behind her, the Coalition Council continued to argue about proper protocol and chain of command. Morrison ignored them, focused on the battle ahead. They'd given humanity cast-off ships and a dead-end patrol route, thinking they were containing a potential problem. Instead, they'd given humanity exactly what it needed to save the galaxy, one exploit at a time. The bridge of the HMS Venture shuddered as another volley of sworn weapons fire dissipated against their jury-rigged shields. Commander Morrison watched the tactical display with growing concern. The enemy was learning, adapting their perfect formations into something more chaotic. They're mimicking our movement patterns, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his voice tense. Not perfectly, but they're trying to replicate our unpredictability. Let them try, Morrison replied, though her grip on her medallion tightened. You can't program chaos. Signal the volunteer fleet. Execute pattern speedrunner's gambit. The human ships, now numbering 36 thanks to the volunteers who joined them, scattered in seemingly random directions. The swarm fleet's attempt to copy their movements failed spectacularly, their biomechanical ships unable to properly replicate the controlled chaos of human tactics. Commander, Chief Engineer Patel's voice crackled over the comm. We're picking up something strange. The swarm's communication frequencies, they're not just tactical data. There's something else. Morrison leaned forward. Can you decode it? Already done, ma'am. It's a message, repeated over and over in their network. Patel's voice wavered. You need to see this. The main screen filled with translated text, scrolling endlessly. Error. Human combat patterns defy strategic logic. Error. Unable to predict optimal counter-response. Error. Species demonstrates controlled deviation from efficiency. Warning. Genetic memory indicates critical threat. Priority override. Eliminate humanity before full potential realized. Genetic memory. Rodriguez wondered aloud. What does that mean? Morrison's eyes widened as understanding dawned. They've met us before. Or rather, they've met species like us before. She keyed her command channel. All ships, hold position. I think I've figured it out. The swarm's massive fleet hung in space before them, their ships still trying to mimic human combat patterns without success. Their attempts looked like a poor AI trying to replicate human art. Technically correct, but missing the essential spark of creativity. The swarm evolves toward perfect efficiency, Morrison explained to her crew. Every species they've encountered, every civilization they've devoured, they've all followed the same pattern. Logical progression, optimal solutions, predictable advancement. She gestured to the tactical display. But humanity, we never cared about optimal. We actively seek out suboptimal solutions just to see if we can make them work. Ma'am, Rodriguez interjected, new data coming in from the swarm network, more genetic memory fragments. The screen filled with new information. Flashes of ancient battles, species that had once displayed unpredictable traits like humanity, species that the swarm had targeted for immediate elimination before they could spread their chaos to other civilizations. That's why they struck first, Morrison breathed. They're not just attacking us because we're a threat. They're attacking us because we're an infection, our way of thinking. Finding exploits, breaking systems, choosing the impossible solution over the optimal one. It spreads to other species. She turned to her tactical display, watching as more coalition ships arrived. Volunteers eager to learn humanity's primitive combat techniques. Look at how many alien crews are already adopting our methods. We're not just beating the swarm, we're changing how the entire galaxy thinks about combat. Commander, Rodriguez called out. Swarm fleet is moving again. They're committing their entire force, every ship they have. Morrison smiled grimly, because they finally understand what they're facing. Humanity never evolved toward perfect efficiency. We evolved toward perfect adaptability. She opened her fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Commander Morrison. The swarm thinks chaos is our weakness. Time to show them it's our greatest weapon. Her fleet of primitive vessels moved to engage the massive swarm armada. Behind them, coalition ships began stripping out their safety systems, their crews learning to embrace humanity's controlled chaos. "Let's show them why speedrunners break games," Morrison declared. "Not because we can't play by the rules, but because making our own rules is what humans do best." Red emergency lights bathed the HMS Venture's bridge in a crimson glow as damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. Commander Morrison stood at her tactical station, watching as 10,000 swarm vessels pressed in around her combined force of barely 200 ships. "Hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, his voice hoarse from hours of combat. "The Pathfinder's gone dark. Challenger's lost engines, and half our volunteer fleet is running on emergency power." Morrison's fingers traced the worn edge of her gaming medallion. "What about the swarm's neural network? Are they still trying to process our combat patterns?" "Yes, Mom." Chief Engineer Patel's voice crackled through static. "Their entire fleet's computational power is dedicated to predicting our movements. They're burning through energy trying to calculate every possible variation." "Perfect." Morrison allowed herself a grim smile. "Send to all ships. Execute Operation Final Boss." Rodriguez's head snapped up. "Ma'am, that maneuver. We've never tested it with this many ships. The timing has to be perfect down to the millisecond. Just like a frame-perfect speed run." Morrison opened the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Commander Morrison. The swarm thinks they've trapped us. They think superior numbers and firepower will overcome human unpredictability. Time to show them why that's exactly what we wanted them to think." Her battered fleet began to move, each ship executing maneuvers that looked like desperate, random attempts to break free. The swarm fleet responded exactly as predicted, their neural network dedicating even more processing power to analyzing the chaos. "They're taking the bait," Rodriguez reported. 95% of their computational capacity is now focused on strategic analysis. Their shields and weapons are running at minimal power. Morrison nodded. "Send the signal to Coalition Command. Tell them to launch the package." A single quantum transmission burst from the Venture, aimed at a seemingly empty sector of space. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then reality itself seemed to glitch. 100 modified probes, each carrying specialized electronic warfare packages designed by human hackers, activated simultaneously. They began broadcasting directly into the swarm's neural network, not attacks or viruses, but pure, weapons-grade chaos. Speed-running clips from 1,000 different games. Sequence breaks that shouldn't be possible. Partial differential equations with deliberately incorrect solutions. Musical compositions that switched time signatures mid-note. Art that violated the rules of perspective. Poetry that broke the laws of grammar while maintaining perfect meaning. The essence of human creativity, distilled into a format the swarm's perfect efficiency couldn't ignore. "Their network is crashing," Patel shouted triumphantly. "They can't process the data fast enough, and they've committed too much computational power to ignore it." Morrison watched as the mighty swarm fleet began to fragment, their perfect coordination shattered by an overdose of human chaos. "All ships, execute attack pattern Speed Devil Ultimate. Show them what happens when you try to calculate the incalculable." Her fleet moved as one, but each ship following its own unique, impossible pattern. The swarm vessels, their neural network overwhelmed by trying to predict the unpredictable, couldn't coordinate their defenses. Multiple chain reactions detected in the swarm fleet, Rodriguez reported, his voice rising with excitement. "Their ships, they're firing on each other. The confusion is spreading through their entire network." Morrison keyed her fleet-wide comm one final time. "All ships, this is Commander Morrison. The speed-running community has a saying. Sometimes the hardest bosses fall to the weirdest strategies. Target their command nodes and fire everything we have left. Let's finish this game." The void erupted with weapons fire as humanity's primitive fleet delivered their killing blow to the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. Not through superior technology or numbers, but through the pure, distilled essence of what made humans unique, their ability to break any system they encountered. Achievement unlocked, Morrison whispered, watching the swarm fleet tear itself apart. Galaxies saved through sequence breaking. Commander Morrison stood before the Galactic Defense Coalition's Grand Chamber, her dress uniform still showing scorch marks from the final battle. Behind her, a massive holographic display showed the wreckage of the swarm fleet, 10,000 ships reduced to drifting debris by a force less than a 50th their size. "The Council has reviewed your combat logs," High Commander Vexthor announced, his crystalline form subdued. "We find ourselves reconsidering our previous assessment of human military doctrine." Morrison allowed herself a small smile, feeling the familiar weight of her gaming medallion in her pocket. "I appreciate the Council's willingness to adapt. Though I should note, what you call human military doctrine started as competitive gaming strategies." "Explain," Council Member Zix demanded, her tentacles writhing with barely contained curiosity. "Humans have spent centuries creating complex systems," Morrison began, "not to solve problems, but to challenge ourselves. Video games, sports, puzzles, artificial rule sets designed to be broken." She gestured to the tactical display. "Every maneuver we used against the swarm came from gamers finding ways to break those systems." Admiral Blackwood stepped forward, his own uniform pristine. The quantum corner clip, originally used to skip a difficult boss fight in Star Crusader 3. The shield bump sequence, a speed-running trick from Galaxy Commander. Even our final strategy came from decades of players finding exploits in seemingly perfect systems. "But these were entertainment programs," another council member protested. "Not military applications." "Exactly," Morrison nodded. "That's why they worked. The swarm evolved to counter military thinking, to predict and overcome optimal combat strategies. But humans, we've spent generations learning to think sideways, to find solutions that shouldn't exist." She keyed a command into her datapad, and a holographic display shifted to show footage from the volunteer fleet. Alien crews learning to strip down their advanced systems, to embrace controlled chaos, to fight like humans. "Look at what happened when we shared our methods," Morrison continued. "Every species that adopted our primitive approach contributed their own unique form of chaos. The swarm couldn't adapt because we weren't just being unpredictable. We were actively breaking their understanding of how space combat should work." High Commander Vexthor's crystals chimed thoughtfully. "Your success cannot be denied. The Coalition must evolve, must learn from this experience." He paused, colors shifting through his form. "We would request that Earth establish a new training division to teach these gaming strategies." Morrison exchanged glances with Admiral Blackwood, who nodded slightly. "I have a better idea," she said. "Instead of just teaching combat techniques, let's share our games, our sports, our puzzles. Let every species learn not just how to fight differently, but how to think differently." Lieutenant Rodriguez, standing at attention behind her, couldn't suppress a grin. "First intergalactic gaming tournament." "Exactly." Morrison faced the council. "The swarm feared us because our chaos could spread to other species. So let's make it spread. Not just as a weapon, but as a way of thinking. Because the next threat we face might be even worse than the swarm, and we'll need every species contributing their own unique form of controlled chaos to overcome it." The council chamber erupted in discussion, but Morrison's attention was drawn to her datapad. A message from Chief Engineer Patel. "New game engine calibrated for crystalline life forms ready for testing. Ready to teach the council how to speedrun." "The Coalition accepts your proposal," Vexthor announced, silencing the chamber. "Earth will lead the development of the Interspecies Gaming Initiative. All member species will be encouraged to participate." Morrison's hand closed around her medallion one final time. From last pick to first line of defense. from primitive savages to revolutionary tacticians, from outcasts to teachers. "Thank you, High Commander," she replied formally. "Though I should warn you, humans take their games very seriously. The galaxy may never be the same." That, Vexthor's crystals chimed with what might have been laughter, is precisely what we're counting on. Behind them, the tactical display showed coalition ships already beginning to adopt modified human designs. Simple, sturdy vessels built not for perfect efficiency, but for breaking the rules of reality in new and creative ways. The game was changing, and humanity was writing the new rulebook.